My name is Whitey Bluestein, and I was the second executive director of Vermont Public Interest Research Group, starting in 1975 through the end of 1977. When I joined VPIRG, Scott Skinner was the first director, and Scott hired me, and I started in June 75. And it was a startup. It was a little organization. And maybe some of the folks that I worked with, Lee Seddon, Deb Katz, Carl Bolin, Peter Cobb, some of those folks might be in the audience, and I say hi to them. I don't know if you can even imagine, other than having an old man in front of you, I don't know if you can even imagine what 47 years ago was, but there was no internet, no cell phones. We still had dinosaurs roaming the streets of Montpelier. But even then, VPIRG was about building an activist network in Vermont and using and working with young people from all the universities and getting young people involved, because it was always about creating the leaders for tomorrow. The culmination of my 2.5 years at Vermont was the town meeting day campaign in March of 1977. Somebody came to me from a little town in Vermont and said, hey, why don't we have a town meeting day campaign and try to stop nuclear power in Vermont? And I thought about it and it seemed like a great idea. I activated our anti-nuke activist network, and we had, it wasn't that much. For Vermont, it was a lot, but we had maybe 25 or 30 activists that I could reach out to by US mail. We didn't have email. I'd have to send them a letter. And we would say, hey, Vermont Yankee is doing this, or Vermont Yankees got an Atom Man campaign, and will you contribute so we can fight? We had the tightest budget. And so we had to use the network to raise money to do all the things that we did. But in that process, we built a really strong network, and it all culminated on town meeting day when 35 towns out of 36, 35 towns in Vermont voted to ban nuclear power plants and ban the transportation and storage of nuclear waste in and through their towns. This was a resounding defeat of the nuclear industry. And while activists were fighting Seabrook and power plants all over the place, this was something that we did in about a month and a half's time. And that's the beauty of Vermont. You can do things like that. I literally drove around the state all through February leading up to town meeting days. And as you know, some days can be really rough out there, but we went around, talked. I was on radio stations, and we had our activists calling in and talking, and talk radio was the best media for anything current at that time. So long story short, we got the towns to pass these resolutions, 35 out of 36 that considered it. And then what did VPIRG do next? VPIRG did what we always do. We went straight to the legislature and we said, hey, now it's time to codify all of these town votes into a state law. And the legislature passed a bill that basically was a copy of the town meeting resolution, and it did the exact same things. It banned nuclear power plants, storage and transportation nuclear wastes in Vermont. So we were very excited about that. And again, we made the New York Times and many other newspapers. The actual town meeting day vote was covered all over the world. It was covered in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Christian Science Monitor, the International Herald Tribune. So we were covered all over the world. And it really was a blow to the nuclear power industry. Now, you say, hey, it's 47 years later, and we still have nukes. And, you know, nuclear power is kind of like a dinosaur that's spinal cord has been cut, and the tail keeps thrashing around. But in any event, it was one of the biggest blows to the industry ever in little Vermont, because a little organization like VPIRG, at the time barely 5 years old, with a bunch of students and activists, fought and won. I want to congratulate Paul, who I've stayed in touch with all these years. He's a wonderful leader, and VPIRG is very lucky to have Paul and all the activists that run around VPIRG and make VPIRG what it is today, something that we never imagined back then.